Ali fight Holmes, and Ali was getting the crap beat out of him for 10 rounds. And when they stopped, everybody was crying, me, cuz we all got
listen, they know, Angelo Dundee knew that I could whoop Muhammad Ali, that he ain't had a chance because I was his sparring partner. I was in there every day with him, man. If he threw it left, I knew if he threw it right. I know how he blocked his punch.
You have probably seen the clip. Mike Tyson and Oscar De La Hoya sitting across from each other on a podcast. Red text burning on screen. Two men who gave their lives to boxing, talking about the sport they know from the inside out. And the moment Larry Holmes comes up, something shifts in the room. The laughter fades. They lean forward. These men fought everybody there was to fight. They bled in the hardest gyms on earth and walked into arenas against the most dangerous people alive. They know exactly what greatness looks like at close range. What they said about Larry Holmes is what most casual fans never got to hear. Today, that changes. Larry Holmes spent his entire career locked between two giants. He came after Muhammad Ali, the most beloved and most famous fighter who ever lived, the most admired athlete on the entire planet for over a decade. And Holmes came right before Mike Tyson, the most feared and explosive heavyweight alive. The force the whole world was already waiting and counting down for. Being caught between those two enormous legends meant the public barely stopped to look at what was standing right in front of them. And what was right in front of them was extraordinary. A complete heavyweight, a mechanical genius, a man with a jaw built from something harder than bone, and a heart that refused to quit no matter what hit it. If this story feels buried to you, hit the hype feature right now and give this video some hype while we run through exactly what the legends said about him. 15 fighters, trainers, and champions looked at Larry Holmes and all pointed in the same direction. We are going to hear from every single one of them, starting from the last voice on the list and working our way back to the man at the very top. Number 15 is Oscar De La Hoya, one of the finest technicians of his era, a man who competed across multiple weight classes and built his entire identity around a masterful left hand. When Oscar De La Hoya watched Larry Holmes, he was not watching out of nostalgia or admiration for a former era. He was studying a craftsman to learn something specific and applicable. He said, "You look at Larry Holmes and you see the perfect jab. As a fighter who relied on my left hand, I studied him. He proved that if you master one punch to that level of perfection, you can control any man in the world. He was the ultimate technician." From a man who lived and built his entire career on the lead hand, calling another fighter the ultimate technician in that same area is about as high a compliment as boxing gives. Oscar De La Hoya studied the very best and said Holmes had the perfect version of the weapon they both built their careers on. Number 14, Sugar Ray Leonard, one of the most celebrated fighters of all time and a man with ring intelligence that very few ever develop, kept it short and exactly right. He called Holmes a pro's pro. No frills, no politics, just truth. Leonard said Holmes did not play for the cameras. He played for the win. He described him as a blue-collar champion who outworked everyone in the gym and let his performances carry all the weight. In a sport that rewards personalities as much as skill, Leonard recognized something rare in Holmes: pure professionalism with zero wasted energy. But here is what makes this interesting. If Oscar De La Hoya was studying Holmes and Sugar Ray Leonard was calling him a pro's pro, why did the average fan look right past him? Why did arenas boo him? Why did coverage push him aside? To understand that, you first have to understand what he was truly capable of technically. And number 13 gives you the clearest window into that. Number 13, Roy Jones Jr. is one of the fastest and most gifted fighters the sport has ever produced. A man with hands and feet so quick, they barely seemed real on film. Someone who defined a generation of elite boxing technique. When Roy talked about Larry Holmes, he zeroed in on something that surprised a lot of people. He said Holmes's jab was as fast as a middleweight's. A man standing 6'3" with an 81-inch reach moving at middleweight hand speed. But Roy went further. He praised the footwork. He talked about Holmes's ability to pivot while throwing the jab for a man of that size. He said Holmes could pivot and leave you swinging at air all night long. Picture that. A massive heavyweight, perfectly balanced, turning out of your path while his jab finds your face before you can reset. That physical combination was unlike anything the heavyweight division had ever seen. 6'3" of height, 81 inches of reach, fists measuring 13.5 inches across, hand speed that had no business existing in a body that size. Holmes generated that power from the ground up. A pivot of the lead foot, a snap of the hips. The force traveling upward through his entire frame and landing at the end of that long arm. The jab he built from those tools was not a simple flick. It started loose and deceptively soft looking. Then, at the moment of impact, It stiffened into something heavy and accurate and punishing. It measured distance. It blinded opponents. It destroyed their ability to time any counter. And it accumulated. Round after round, it wore faces down and broke concentration until an opponent stopped boxing and started just trying to survive. Number 12 knows a very specific version of what being in the ring with Holmes felt like, but his lesson did not come from the jab. Ernie Shavers was the hardest puncher in the history of the heavyweight division. Nobody hit harder. Not Foreman, not Tyson. Nobody. Shavers was the kind of puncher who ended conversations with a single shot. And in 1979, he loaded everything he had and threw the best right hand of his entire career directly at Larry Holmes's head. It landed clean. Holmes went down flat on the canvas. Shavers stood over him, absolutely certain the fight was finished. He said it himself. I hit him with the best shot I ever threw. I saw his eyes roll back. Then he's standing in front of me, jabbing again. I thought, what is this man made of? That question is the heart of the whole Larry Holmes story, because the answer goes well beyond normal toughness. Number 11, Michael Spinks. The man who eventually ended Holmes's run at 48-0 spoke with genuine reverence about the experience of fighting him. Spinks said he had to be perfect to beat him. Not good, not great, perfect. Because even when Holmes was behind on the scorecards, he was still dangerous. Even when tired and hurting, he never stopped searching for a way to win. Spinks called him a true professor of the game. And that word professor is exactly right. Every round Holmes fought was a lesson being delivered. Number 10, Teddy Atlas, one of boxing's most respected voices. A man who has studied fighters at every level for decades, reached for language that goes beyond sports when he described the Shavers' recovery. Atlas said Holmes took a shot that would have killed a normal human being. He got up and went on to win. Atlas called it something spiritual, not remarkable toughness, not a good chin, something spiritual. When a man with Atlas's precise understanding of what fighters are capable of at their limits uses that kind of language, it means what he witnessed was outside the normal range of what boxing contains. Holmes stood up from that canvas and walked right back to jabbing Ernie Shavers. He did not clinch. He did not just survive. He went back to work. And he stopped Shavers in the 11th round. To understand why all of this kept getting dismissed and overlooked, you need to hear what number 9 had to say. Ray Mancini, a warrior who understood the politics and cruelty of boxing better than most people in the sport, called what happened to Holmes a crime. Not a mistake, not an oversight, a crime. He said, it was a crime how they treated him. He followed a god, and nobody wanted a new king. But if you look at the tape, Larry was just as dominant as anyone who ever lived. The public followed Ali like a religion, with complete devotion. When Ali stepped away from the sport, nobody was emotionally ready to transfer that same energy to the next man. They wanted Ali back. When they could not have him back, they turned away from the fighter holding the championship belt in front of them. The tape does not lie, even when the crowds do. Number 8. Emanuel Stewart, the architect of the Kronk Gym and the man behind multiple world champions, went further than almost anyone when measuring Holmes against history. He said Holmes had better mechanics than Muhammad Ali, not a lesser version, better mechanics. He said Holmes was the most technically sound heavyweight since Joe Louis. And then Stewart made a point most people missed. He said Holmes's right hand was significantly underrated because the jab was so dominant it pulled all the attention. Opponents focused so hard on solving the jab that they forgot a second weapon was waiting behind it. Emanuel Stewart called him a complete package with no obvious weakness to attack. Number 7 came closer than most to finding a crack. Ken Norton was a physically powerful heavyweight who had famously broken Muhammad Ali's jaw. Norton arrived with a turtle defense, relentless pressure, and the conditioning of a man ready for 15 brutal rounds. And he delivered. For 14 rounds, those two fought a war that tested everything Holmes had. Entering the final round, the scorecards were deadlocked. Holmes was fighting through a partially torn left bicep and a split lip already stitched during the fight. His body was giving out. Norton pressed forward one last time. Norton described what happened himself. He said they both gave everything, but Holmes had an extra gear in the 15th round. He said Holmes wanted it more than his own life that night. In those final 3 minutes, the two traded toe-to-toe, with Holmes's mouthpiece flying into the crowd from the force of the exchange. Holmes won the round. Holmes won the fight. And the Easton Assassin became heavyweight champion of the world. Number 6 came to a very different version of Holmes at a very different moment and walked away with the same conclusion. Evander Holyfield was in his prime, one of the most complete heavyweights of his era, athletic, powerful, and fast. Holmes was 42 years old. The outcome should have been obvious. but Holyfield admitted afterward that he could not get past that jab. He said an old man was still taking him to school. His description of Holmes' ability to control distance at that age was a single word: legendary. A 42-year-old man using ring IQ to neutralize a prime Evander Holyfield. That one fight says more about what Holmes understood than almost anything else in his career. Number 5. Jerry Cooney experienced what it felt like to face Holmes in perhaps the most hostile environment a champion had ever been asked to fight in. The 1982 fight was sold with racial undertones that have no place in sport. Cooney was marketed as the Great White Hope. Holmes received death threats. There were police snipers on the rooftops of Caesar's Palace that night. And despite being the reigning world champion, Holmes was introduced to the crowd first. A deliberate act of disrespect. It did not work.
Cooney said Larry was a warrior. He said the whole world was rooting against him, and he just stayed focused. He took Cooney apart, piece by piece, clinical, precise, and merciless. Number 4. Lennox Lewis built one of the greatest heavyweight careers of the modern era on the same principles Holmes established. Lewis said if you want to learn how to box as a big man, you watch Larry Holmes. He said Holmes's fundamentals were perfect. He never beat himself. You had to try to beat him, and most simply could not figure it out. Lewis modeled his entire approach to distance and long-range dominance directly on the blueprint Holmes created. And that blueprint passed forward to Lewis and onward to others who understood that controlling space is the highest form of heavyweight boxing. Number 3. George Foreman felt the exhaustion of facing that kind of mastery firsthand and described it in terms every boxing fan can picture. He talked about what it felt like to think you had Holmes in trouble. You believe you have landed something real and meaningful. You feel the shift in momentum. Then he shakes it off completely and comes right back at you with the jab, calm and precise, like nothing happened. Foreman said Holmes had a heart bigger than his chest. He called him the most durable heavyweight he had ever seen in his career. He said you would think you had him gone, and he would just shake it off and start jabbing again. From a man himself known for terrifying power and resilience, calling someone else the most durable heavyweight he ever saw is not a small statement. To understand where all of this came from, you have to go back before the titles and before the wars. Between 1971 and 1975, Larry Holmes was a sparring partner, not for average fighters. He worked alongside number 2, Muhammad Ali, at Ali's camp in Deer Lake. For years, Holmes absorbed everything Ali had. Every movement, every principle, every rhythm. Ali said it himself. He said Holmes was the only man who truly learned everything he had to teach. The footwork, the speed, the toughness the public never gave him credit for. Where Ali operated on natural instinct and raw genius, Holmes took the same principles and refined them into pure mechanical discipline, more structured, more durable, built to survive and win a 15-round war. Holmes also sparred with Joe Frazier, who delivered education through pain. Frazier broke Holmes's ribs in sparring during training camp and still expected him at the gym the next morning. That is the kind of hard and unforgiving foundation that produces a man who absorbs Ernie Shaver's best punch and goes right back to work without a moment of hesitation. Richie Giacchetti took all of that and polished it into what became the Easton Assassin. And finally, we arrive at number 1, Mike Tyson, the most feared heavyweight of his era, the man the entire boxing world was counting down toward while Holmes held the championship, the man who eventually beat an older version of Holmes in 1988. And in the years since, Tyson became one of the loudest and most consistent voices defending Holmes's legacy. He said it plainly and without hesitation. He said Larry Holmes had the single best jab in the history of the sport. Not one of the best, the best ever. He said it was not just a flick. It was like a power punch. He said Holmes would hit you with it 50 times around until your face was a mess. He called him a master. When Mike Tyson calls you a master, you listen. When Oscar de la Hoya studies your jab as the standard for a career. When Sugar Ray Leonard calls you a pro's pro. When 15 fighters and trainers who gave everything to this sport all point in the same direction, the case is settled. 20 title defenses, 48-0, second only to Joe Louis for consecutive heavyweight title defenses. A man who absorbed the hardest punch Ernie Shavers ever threw and came back jabbing. A man who fought with snipers on rooftops and dismantled his opponent with cold precision. A man who took a prime Evander Holyfield to school at 42 years old. Larry Holmes was not a placeholder between Ali and Tyson. He was not a transitional figure. He was one of the greatest heavyweights who ever lived. And the men who fought him knew it long before anyone else did. Where do you rank him among the all-time greats? Drop it in the comments. Like this video. Subscribe if you are not already here. We will see you in the next one.